Hi everyone, it's Linda here from Bad Joe's Bead House with our weekly Facebook Live video. This week we are actually doing a little project. I was cleaning up last night at home and trying to find something and came across some Rivolis that I used in an Easter showpiece a couple of years ago. I thought, oh, why haven't I played with these some more? That sent me down a rabbit path onto our website looking at patterns using Rivolis. Came across one option, then went and rummaged through my bead stash and actually worked out that I had enough beads at home to actually make this. So but it was a fun experience of going from finding something to inspiration to hunting for a pattern to do I have it all, and working out of my stash. So I know a lot of people who often will find a pattern or get inspired by a piece, go hunt for a pattern, and then, not have one element. Well, in this miracle, I actually had everything I needed. So very exciting. So we're going to make the second component for this piece today. Share that with you guys. So as you would have seen on the newsletter that went out on, I think it was Tuesday. It's been one of those weeks. The August box has been launched, so thank you for everyone who purchased one of those. It's been a fun challenge working with that color palette, um, I must say, and in that process, I actually managed to get two projects that I've been wanting to figure out how to make for quite some time off my bucket list. So very happy about that, and really enjoyed both making the bracelet that you've seen and the bonus project as well. You would have also seen I launched a Bead with Lynda box. So that is filled with the components that I've picked thus far for Seed Bead September. So for three projects that I'm going to be working on, there is a pink colorway, which I believe there's only one left, and a purple colorway. That's because one project I was limited in the number of focal elements that I could get. So hence there's 5 pink, 5 purple. So you'll have beads to match depending on which box. I'm also throwing in a couple of other elements to give you guys some design choices, because one of those projects I had nutted out before we listed the box. One I had nearly nutted out, and the other one I am still figuring out, and I've got beads in transit for it. So that's going to be the third one, and it's probably going to be more of a live experiment with me, but also giving you guys a lot more choice as I play around with componentry as well. But right now, I'm going to tip you guys down and we're going to have some fun making the buttercup earring. So I did post the link out for this up on the website. So the component that started all of this is actually not on my mat at the moment. So I'm working with the Duracoat Champagne Gold and Matte Black. So if you remember from last year when I focused on um, different shaped beads, these are nib beads in matte black. We've got some 8s, 11s, and 15s in the Duracoat Champagne, which is the 4202. And we've got some matte black Delicas, which is 310. But this is the little guy that started it all. So I came across my stash of these patina Rivolis that I brought in when I did my crawl and double crawl, all with black that had different shades of patinaing over it. It was one of my Easter show pieces from a couple of years ago. I never really brought these onto range, so if this is the sort of stuff you'd love to see added to the range, let me know, and I will see what I can do. But I just love the little finish. It does kind of partially go onto the back, but it's really more about the front. So I just love this kind of like two-tone effect. So this is a nice, as I said, simple project, and I could work out of my stash, which was really, really, really exciting. So as I said, nib beads are a two-hole bead, so they do have a hole at the narrow end and a hole at the top end. As I defined them at the time, these are very much remind me of the candy corn shape. But obviously these ones you're not going to eat. Um, so yeah, this is just a fun little project. So we just need 8 of these little nib beads. So I'm just getting that process started, and you're just dropping a size 11 round in between each one. So sorry I didn't get this prepped. I normally would have this part of this prepped a little earlier. It's just been a bit of a crazy day, trying to finalize some stock orders and help some customers track down some stock. Um, so yeah, we've got our, definitely have 8, so that's 4 and 4, yep. Okay, so the pattern calls for this just to be tied off in a, square knot. So we will just do our little, oops, if I can actually find my thread today. I'm a little, or thumbs as well, it would appear. It is cold and I've taken my gloves off so I can actually bead. And yes, the air conditioning is working, but it is very, very loud above my head. So I don't particularly want that running whilst I'm trying to speak to you guys doing live. So I'm making a complete and utter mess of my knots, which is why you don't normally see me doing knotting on screen. Okay, so we have our little initial circle off. And I will apologize if anybody is leaving comments with the screen split I've got to do so I can see the pattern. I can't quite see comments, so I will reply to those after the video. So we've got our first round of 11s in. The next step we need to do is create another round of 11s. In total, there will be 3 rounds of the 11s going through. So I'm just going to, I may have tied that a little too tight. So I'm just passing through the next nib and picking up my first of my 11s. Now, eventually this is going to be like a little triangle of 11s sitting here. And they will kind of protrude a little bit, but it looks good. So I will say it was kind of fun just, perusing the patterns. I have set them up so that you can search by different bead components that I have found in, the materials list of all the patterns. So it did help last night as I found that Rivoli. Just perused from there and then, kind of figured out what can I do. And it was nice because it also got me out of my creative block on the September project that I'm designing for the box. So it was most handy, which often just picking up a pattern and just stitching something, has a way of working its magic. Oops. So you can see I am threading several at a time and then doing my pull through. It's just one thing I like to, it's not always a great thing to do, but sometimes it does help me just do the needle part a little bit faster. And sometimes it gets me into trouble. So now we are doing our third row of 11s. So the base row here, so you see I've got one row sitting on top, one row sitting underneath. That's my base row. The next one's going to sit either side, and basically you're just sitting them on top of that base row. So you can see here they're just going to sit up like that. And that's the great thing with this bead having that wider top, is you can design to play either with the base or the top, and you can do this stacking of seed beads within it. Oops, sent that one flying. Oops. Be careful trying not to pull that through one of your 11s. We just want to be working within the nibs themselves. Okay. And we're coming out of our final one here. Let's get my tail thread out of the way. Yep, he's not in my way. Okay, let me just go get to my next step. That's as much as I could remember in my head. Okay. So now we are going to work with our little delicas. This in the pattern, it says pick a contrast color. I went and picked the matte black so that basically it kind of disappears into the design a little bit. So for that, you just need to exit through one of the 11s. And then we're going to be picking up, it says 3 delicas. So 3 delicas into an 11. So we're working on that top line. So you can see here my delicas are just blending completely in on top of my nibs. Now I could have chose to do the matte champagne, sorry, the champagne gold. I couldn't find my tube of those delicas at home or the matte ones. So decided instead when I looked at the finished samples just to do it in a color that matched the nib. 2 and 3. Oops. Tail thread's being very pesky. So I've got 2 more rounds of 3s to go. Okay, so now we actually, I know the next step is we need to exit out of the middle of that delica band. So I'm just going to pass my needle out there because I'm pretty sure. Yeah, done that. Sorry, as I said, just scrolling my instructions. Yep, so I did that right. Now I get to drop my delica, sorry, my Rivoli in. I'll get my terms right today. So you can see that little black really just does accent around that. I'm just going to focus on that. So you can just see the little black Delica edging around the Rivoli, and I've got my lovely gold and sparkle Rivoli in place now. And this is where we get to have fun with the 15s. So we are picking up, it looks like 3 15s. And as I said, I'm exiting from the middle there, and we're going to exit from the middle again. And this is what is basically locking down that Rivoli in place, just this little grouping of 3. And it's kind of going to look like it's floating in there with the use of the matte black delicas. So it's something you can consider when you're doing something like this, is how can you, hide beads to give it, a kind of floating effect. It does pull out that black just a little bit, but it is also rather hidden. So it's that kind of, fun magic trickery one can have at times. Oops. Of course, it's handy when the beads actually will pick up. Oops. Okay, so we're just going to pick up. Got, I think, one more section to go. So into that middle. Oops, nearly picked the wrong one. Now I've got super tight tension, so the next step is actually to stitch all the way through that again. With my tight tension, I'm not going to. I don't think it's necessary for me. If you've got a looser tension, I definitely recommend going through that again. It's just that I know how noxiously tight my tension is, so I feel comfortable not doing that extra step. So the next step we need to do is to transition back to our nibs. So I'm just pulling that nice and tight. Whoops. Trying not to send this out of my fingers. And we need to get into the bottom hole of the nib at this stage, and you would just need to come out the other side. So we've done that. And from there, we're just going to flip our work over and go through top of that nib. So basically that's just transitioning our work. We started off that inside ring, we've gone and decorated on top of that inside ring, and now we're going to do some work with the outside. Okay, so the first step through here is to use a size 8. Now, in the pattern, it did call for Matubos, which I didn't have any. The Miyukis do work. The difference between the two of them is the Matubo actually has a larger hole and is just slightly bigger. So when it comes to the end part of that, that's when it can cause some challenges, because the end of this, it actually calls for you to put a jump ring through one of these eights to attach to your ear hook. That's going to be a challenge just on these guys being that little bit smaller, and for me being Duracoats, the hole is again a little bit smaller. Um, so I'm going to talk to you guys about a couple of tips you could try around that, or you can just simply sew in your ear hook with a little size 15 loop. So there's always ways you can adapt. If you don't have everything that's prescribed in a pattern, you can always adapt to make it work with what you do have. So I've got one more to go in there. So you can see with that lovely fanning out, the 8 really does work quite nicely at the top. So we've got our little band of 8s in now. Now I know that thread is nice and secure and it's getting in my way. So I'm just going to grab the thread zapper, and for the moment, I'm just going to lop it off small, and I'll come back and get it nice and tight later. That keeps it out of my way. So you could stop at that point and have a nice, really simple element. You could create a whole pile of these, join them all together. It looks pretty awesome at the back in just that view. But there is steps to keep embellishing this. So bear with me as I scroll to get those steps. So from here, we're going to add a decorative over the top, and that's using a 15 and 11 and an 8. So when I said 11, I meant the Delica. So you are adding in that little pop of black again. Now, you can mix up your colors here. You could have a different, again, I could have, if I'd had the 15s, made that all, so it would be all gold up here. I could have introduced the matte version of the Delica. But as I said, I was working within what I had in my stash. And sometimes, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And that's when, you come along and you either adapt again, or you head to the bead shop and buy the beads you need. Or in my case, if they're not here, I get to order them. But it is fun when you can find something that is just in your stash. It's also probably why I know Paula, when she really finds a color she likes, she tries to get it in 15s, 11s, in the rounds 15. So she has the 15, 8, and 11 round option in her colors. Not so sure if she extends that to her delicas or not. Um, but it's handy when there is colors that you like working with, or that are just good classic colors. So, your silver, your golds, and your blacks are good. Just, whoops, nearly made a mistake there. Good to have a base range in your stash. It does help then when you're doing something like this. Of course, the nib beads do come in a variety of colors. I just happen to have the black at home. Okay, so that's our last of our little Pico detail, and I know I've got to get through there. It's always the fun trying to angle your needle. Okay, and so now we're starting with the detail on the back, which we are on. And this is towards the final steps, guys. So this time it is picking up 4 of the 15s, and we're just adding some detail to the back. Oops. So you are exiting. Am I exiting out of the right spot? Oops. That would have been a good thing to check, wouldn't it? Done. Sorry, just screwed myself up. Um, End of the row. No, I didn't weave up to here. So that would have caused a bit of an error in my design. Well, not my design, but in the back of the pattern. Okay, so we're exiting from there and we're going to use that top 11 that we put in. So we're just creating a nice little V detail, and it is also just pulling our whole design back just a little bit and pushing that Rivoli out. So you can see here as we keep going, it's going to create a V detail. So I am actually going to cheat at this point, put this one aside and bring out the one I finished last night. So that's the V detail. As I said, when it's complete, it kind of turns that into a flower at the back. So you've got that lovely little flower detail and you've got your Rivoli sitting in there all nice and neat. So that was a nice quick little change. So whilst I had everything in my stash last night, I don't have plated findings at home because plate doesn't work with my body. I strip it off. That's just the joys of my skin chemistry. As I pointed out, the eights have notoriously tiny holes, and this pattern calls for jump rings to be used to connect your ear hook. So I've just gone and pulled some pale gold in our copper range because the pale gold matches the champagne color really, really well. The thing I don't like when I'm working with these guys is I can open and close those with my fingers, but they are thin, and so that will work generally with the Duracoats. So I could get my ear hook in, use that, and go straight into a ear hook. So I'm just going to grab a ear hook. Oops, sorry. So I'm just grabbing one of our pale gold plain ear hooks. So it just looks like that. So very quickly, obviously I'd have to tie that thread off. Very, very easily, again, with my fingers, and that's always a concern for me if that does get tugged. But that would be a finished piece. So that's, if you're following the pattern, ideally you'd want a smaller one. The 7 fits, the 5 doesn't, and I don't have 6s in stock. The 7 is on range because I had a number of polymer clay artists, and that's the particular size they needed in this color. So hence the range is being dictated to us that way. So I'm going to put those jump rings back because I'm actually going to stitch my ear hook in, which is always my particular preference. I will be taking out, however, that pale gold when I get home and changing it back over to a stainless so I can actually wear these. But, little things. So I am just going to grab about 5, no, actually, if I grab 10 of these 15s, that ear hook loop is going to be big enough that I can thread this straight through. So I've just got 10 on my needle. And I am coming out of an 8 at the top, so that's where I want my 15, that's where I want my ear hook to sit. So if I position my ear hook that way, and it does look pretty closed, I'm just going to thread through my needle. Because you are stitching this on, you do want to take your time to make sure that it is going to be facing the right direction, because the last thing you'd want to do is stitch it on and then have it go backwards. And that's obviously falling off just because that's not completely closed. So that's another reason why I tend to work with the wire guards and then put an ear hook on, or a closed ring and then do it. But we will work with what works for the piece for right now. I probably could have put less 15s on. Personal decision to do 5 there, which makes 10, so 5 for each side. Probably could have got away with 3 or 4. So again, that's where you can make a judgment call of what you like best. And it's just going to be a simple matter of stitching that in and not getting it caught around your ear hook, which is again where if you're working with a closed ring, much less tanglesome. But it just depends on what you like to work with. But from there, it's just going to be stitching that in. I would probably recommend stitching this little loop, um, you know, at least 3 times, 4 if you can get it to work, just so you have a really nice secure loop. And one strand of fire line can escape through that. You'd hope by the time you could get 3 or 4 in here, it's not going to come off. But I'm going to leave that to finish. So that gives you an idea of my quick little from my stash ear hook, using the cute little patina that I found. But I think this could be really fun. Make a bigger version with a larger Rivoli. Could be fun to experiment with, to make a matching pendant. Dangle a tassel off this, or making a whole strand of these and making that the necklace. Lots of possibilities when you start to play. So I hope you have enjoyed my little bit of stash playtime. I certainly had some fun playing around with that one last night, and it's always fun just to go and explore the pattern library and see what's going to speak to you with something you find in your stash that looks really pretty. So yeah, I'll be back next week with our next Facebook Live. I will see you guys all then. Have a safe, fun, creative, warm weekend. Bye for now.